The morning mist hung low over the valley as Jake and Emma Hayes stood before the old cottage, their breath forming small clouds in the cool autumn air. Behind them, their rusty pickup truck sat silent, having carried them along winding dirt roads for nearly 3 hours. Before them stood a structure that seemed to have grown from the earth itself, its wooden walls weathered by countless seasons, its roof covered in moss and creeping vines that gave it the appearance of something from a forgotten fairy tale. Jake, the older twin by 7 minutes, ran a calloused hand through his dark hair and let out a long, slow breath. Emma stood beside him, her hands tucked into the pockets of her worn jacket, her eyes scanning every detail of their unexpected inheritance. They were both 28 years old, their faces bearing the honest lines of people who had spent their lives working the land. Their family farm, 3 counties over, had finally succumbed to dead and drought the previous spring. They had sold everything except the truck and the clothes on their backs. "Well," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had learned not to expect too much from life. "It's ours now, if you can call it that," Emma replied, though her voice held no bitterness. She had always been the more optimistic of the two, finding hope in small things. The letter from the lawyer had arrived 6 weeks ago, informing them that their great-uncle Thomas, a man they had met only once as children, had passed away and left them his property. The lawyer's description had been vague. A cottage in the woods. Some land. Nothing of great value, he had said, but it was theirs if they wanted it. With nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose, they had loaded their few possessions into the truck and driven north, following directions to a place they had never been, to claim an inheritance from a man they barely remembered. As they stood there, taking in the sight before them, a sound broke the morning silence. It was a low, mournful howl, coming from somewhere inside the cottage. Emma's hand instinctively reached for Jake's arm. "There's something in there," she whispered. Jake nodded slowly. "The lawyer mentioned something about a dog. Said Uncle Thomas had one. I guess nobody knew what to do with it after he passed." They approached the front door carefully, their footsteps soft on the carpet of fallen pine needles. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, and when Jake pushed it open, it creaked in protest, the sound echoing through the empty rooms beyond. Inside, the cottage was dim and cool, with shafts of morning light filtering through windows clouded with dust and draped with cobwebs. The furniture was simple and spare. A wooden table and 2 chairs. A fireplace built from river stones. Shelves lined with old books, their spines faded and titles barely legible. And there, in the corner of the main room, lay a dog. He was a large animal, his coat a mix of brown and gold, matted and dirty from weeks of being alone. His eyes, dark and intelligent, watched them with a mixture of hope and wariness. He did not stand when they entered. He simply watched, as if trying to determine whether these strangers meant him harm or salvation. Emma moved first, as Jake knew she would. She had always had a way with animals, a gentle manner that put them at ease. She knelt down slowly, several feet from the dog, and extended her hand, palm down, letting him catch her scent. "Hey there, boy," she said softly. "You've been all alone, haven't you?" The dog's tail gave a tentative wag, stirring the dust on the wooden floor. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. They could see his ribs through his matted coat, could see the exhaustion in his movements. Someone had been leaving food and water, the lawyer had said, but only once a week. Just enough to keep the animal alive. Jake found a bowl and filled it with water from a hand pump in the kitchen that, miraculously, still worked. The dog drank deeply, then looked up at them with something like gratitude in his eyes. "We'll call him Cooper," Emma said, running her hand gently over his head. "Uncle Thomas's dog, our dog now." That first day passed in a blur of cleaning and discovery. They swept out dust and debris, opened windows to let fresh air circulate through rooms that had been closed too long. They found Uncle Thomas's simple belongings. Clothes folded in a cedar chest. A few dishes in the kitchen. Tools in a small shed out back. Everything spoke of a life lived with intention and simplicity, with no waste and no excess. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in shades of amber and gold, Jake built a fire in the stone fireplace. They had brought some provisions with them, and Emma prepared a simple meal of beans and rice, sharing portions with Cooper, who ate slowly, as if unable to believe his good fortune. That night, as they lay in sleeping bags on the cottage floor, Cooper settled between them, his warmth a comfort in the unfamiliar darkness. Outside, the wind moved through the tall pines, creating a sound like distant waves. For the first time in months, Emma felt something close to peace. "We can make this work," she whispered into the darkness. "We can fix this place up, maybe find work in town. It's a fresh start, Jake." Her brother's response was slow in coming. "Maybe," he said finally. "We'll see." The days that followed fell into a natural rhythm. They rose with the sun, ate simple breakfasts, and spent their days working to make the cottage livable. Jake repaired the sagging porch steps, replaced broken window panes, and patched holes in the roof. Emma scrubbed and cleaned, hung curtains made from old sheets, and planted herbs in a small garden plot she cleared near the kitchen window. Cooper followed them everywhere, his strength returning with regular meals and attention. He was a smart dog, they discovered, understanding commands and gestures with remarkable speed. There was something almost uncanny about his intelligence, the way he seemed to know what they needed before they asked. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after their arrival, Emma was working in the garden when Cooper began to behave strangely. He paced back and forth along the edge of the forest, whining and looking back at her repeatedly. When she ignored him, he approached and gently took the hem of her jacket in his mouth, tugging insistently. "What is it, boy?" she asked, brushing dirt from her hands. "What do you want to show me?" Cooper released her jacket and bounded toward the tree line, looking back to make sure she was following. Emma called for Jake, and together they followed the dog into the forest. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy above, creating a dappled pattern of light and shadow on the forest floor. Cooper led them along a barely visible path, winding between trees and over fallen logs, moving with purpose and direction. They walked for perhaps 15 minutes, climbing a gentle slope, until Cooper stopped at the base of a massive old oak tree. The dog began to dig at the base of the tree, his paws working furiously at the soft earth. Jake and Emma exchanged glances. "Should we help him?" Emma asked. Jake knelt down and began to move earth with his hands, working alongside the dog. Emma joined them, and together they excavated a hole about 2 feet deep. Jake's fingers struck something solid, something that wasn't wood or stone. They cleared away more dirt, revealing the corner of a metal box. It took all of Jake's strength to pull it free from the earth. The box was old, heavy, and locked with a rusted padlock. Back at the cottage, Jake used bolt cutters from Uncle Thomas's tool shed to break the lock. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of papers, deeds and documents, and beneath them, carefully packaged and preserved, were gold coins. Hundreds of them, gleaming dully in the afternoon light. Emma covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide. Jake simply stared, unable to process what he was seeing. "Uncle Thomas," Emma whispered. "He was a gold prospector. I remember Dad mentioning it once. Said his uncle used to pan for gold in these mountains." Jake lifted out one of the documents, unfolding it carefully. It was a deed to the property, showing not just the cottage and the immediate surroundings, but 300 acres of forested land extending up into the mountains. Another document showed mineral rights. And there were more papers, bank statements from decades past, letters, a journal. They spent the evening reading Uncle Thomas's journal by firelight, with Cooper lying at their feet. The story that emerged was one of patience and persistence. Thomas had spent 40 years prospecting in these mountains, living simply, saving everything. He had never married, had few friends, and had devoted his life to the land. The gold he had found over those decades had been carefully hidden, saved not for himself but for whoever might come after him. The last entry in the journal was dated 3 months before his death. In shaky handwriting, Uncle Thomas had written, "To whoever finds this, know that wealth is not found in gold alone. I lived a rich life in these mountains, with simple needs and a good dog for company. The gold is yours now. Use it wisely, use it well, and remember that the greatest fortune is a life lived with purpose and peace." Emma wiped tears from her eyes. "He left this for us. He knew we might need it someday." Jake nodded slowly, his throat tight with emotion. He reached down and stroked Cooper's head. "And he left us you, didn't he, boy? To make sure we found it. You knew all along." Cooper's tail thumped against the floor, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. The weeks that followed brought changes, but not the dramatic ones that might be expected. Jake and Emma did not rush to town to deposit their fortune. They did not make wild plans or dream impossible dreams. Instead, they took their time, thinking carefully about what they wanted and what they needed. They hired a lawyer to help them understand the value of their inheritance and to ensure everything was properly documented. The gold coins alone were worth a substantial sum. The land, it turned out, was worth even more. A conservation group had been trying to purchase land in the area for years to protect it from development. The Hayes twins had something rare and valuable, pristine forest land with no encumbrances. But they did not sell. Not all of it, anyway. They sold the mineral rights, having no interest in disrupting the land their uncle had loved. They sold a conservation easement, protecting most of the acreage from future development while providing them with enough money to live comfortably for years to come. What they kept was the cottage and 20 acres surrounding it, and they set about making it truly home. They repaired the cottage properly, reinforcing the structure while maintaining its rustic character. They installed modern necessities, electricity from solar panels, a proper bathroom, a kitchen with a new stove. But they kept the stone fireplace, the wooden floors, the feeling of a place connected to the earth and the forest. Emma expanded her garden, planting vegetables and herbs, learning the rhythms of the mountain seasons. Jake built furniture in the workshop he created in Uncle Thomas's old shed, discovering a talent he never knew he had. His pieces were simple and sturdy, made from fallen timber he collected from the forest. People from town began to commission his work. They adopted 2 more dogs from a shelter in town, rescues like Cooper had been. The 3 dogs became inseparable, spending their days exploring the forest and their nights sleeping in front of the fire. Cooper remained the leader, the wise old soul who had led them to their fortune and who now presided over their small household with gentle authority. Autumn turned to winter, and the forest transformed into a world of white silence. Snow covered the cottage roof like a blanket, and icicles hung from the eaves like crystal decorations. Jake and Emma kept the fire burning, kept the dogs fed and warm, and discovered that they had never been happier. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled warmly within, they sat at the wooden table Jake had built, sharing a simple meal. Cooper and the other dogs lay contentedly nearby. The cottage glowed with soft lamplight, and the scent of pine and wood smoke filled the air. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if Uncle Thomas hadn't left us this place?" Emma asked, her voice quiet and reflective. Jake considered the question, his gaze moving around the room they had made home. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. We're here now. That's what matters." "We were so focused on what we'd lost," Emma continued. "The farm, everything we'd worked for. We thought we had nothing left. But Uncle Thomas saw something different. He saw possibility. He saw the future." Jake nodded, reaching across the table to take his sister's hand. "He gave us more than gold, Em. He gave us a second chance. A place to belong. A reason to hope." Cooper lifted his head, as if understanding their conversation, and gave a soft woof of agreement. The other dogs stirred, and for a moment, the cottage was filled with the sound of thumping tails and contented sighs. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the forest in pristine white. Inside, the Hayes twins sat in the warm glow of their cottage, surrounded by their dogs, grateful for the inheritance they had received. Not just the gold or the land, but the wisdom of a man who had understood that true wealth comes from living simply, loving deeply, and leaving the world a little better than you found it. As the fire burned low and the night deepened, Emma rose to add another log. The flames caught and rose, sending dancing shadows across the walls. She looked at her brother, at Cooper and the other dogs, at the home they had built together from the foundation their uncle had provided. "We're going to be okay," she said softly. "Better than okay." Jake smiled, the first truly relaxed smile she had seen on his face in years. "Yeah," he agreed, "we really are." And in that moment, in that small cottage in the mountains, surrounded by forest and snow and the simple comforts of home, they knew that they had found something more valuable than any amount of gold. They had found peace. They had found purpose. They had found their way home. Cooper rested his head on his paws and closed his eyes, his work complete. He had kept his promise to the old man who had loved him, had led these lost souls to the fortune they needed most. Not the coins buried beneath the oak tree, though those had helped. But the real treasure. The understanding that home is not a place you start from, but a place you build, piece by piece, day by day, with love and patience and hope. The wind whispered through the pines, and the cottage stood, strong and warm against the winter night, sheltering all who dwelled within its walls.